Happy Monday, if it's Monday today.
Or whatever day it is.
Happy Carmudgeon Day.
It's Carmudgeon
to all
Day.
who celebrate. Carmudgeon Show, that's what this is.
Yes.
I'm Derek Tam-Scott. That is Jason Cammisa.
And that is a BMW E30.
Which has absolutely nothing to do with what we'll be talking about
Oh,
today.
it does?
Very nearly nothing to do with what we're talking about today.
No, well, it's straight six.
Okay. Well done.
Which was the original engine configuration for the Toyota Land Cruiser.
The subject of today's episode.
Yes.
And Jason's somewhat recent Icons episode on the same subject.
Yeah, it's one of those fun cars that you sort of don't know you love until you really spend some time with them. Or
Yes.
I should say lineage. It's a lineage of cars that you could wind up loving. Yeah, not a truck guy. You're not a truck guy.
Correct.
Although we're both closet like Raptor
We
guys.
dabble. I mean, I've owned a Defender and a couple Range Rovers.
Yeah, I had a Isuzu Pup. That's the closest thing I've ever had.
A truckette.
A truckette. Yes, and I have that, Beatrice.
Which is not a truck or a truckette.
It's a E30ette. It says dirty E30 on the back, which is pretty good. Okay, let's
hop to it. This is part of the jump, skip, hop, whatever, part of the Hagerty Podcast Network.
Yes. And we're done. Clap.
And we're done. I'm going to clap. That was reasonably sufficient.
Still, there's no bass to it. It's got to be. No, there's no bass. No. Sorry, I'm just turning into applause because that was.
Have you reviewed your review?
Yes. I've reviewed my review. It's been quite a lot of weeks and months and a lot of other cars reviewed and driven since I did this.
And how many, this being Land Cruiser, of course, how many Land Cruisers did you cruise the land in?
Are we counting Lexus GXs?
How many GXs did you drive?
2.
Which ones?
Both of the current generation. So
there's more than one current generation GX?
Well, I know I drove 2 different cars that are so.
Oh, well, they're the identical cars.
Not identical, different specs, so different suspension. Okay, so by way of background, we thought it would be a great idea to do an Icons on Toyota Land Cruiser, which is of course an Icon. So,
is that how we're getting to look behind the curtain to see how Jason selects the subjects?
It was late in the season. It was like late November. We're like, yeah, we have to get a episode out, and we were exhausted, and we had done a lot of other things, and we're like,
so you're like, why not make it extra work?
Let's just go all the way to Utah in the middle of winter and
have like so many vehicles.
Well, but the thing about the so many vehicles is there were a lot of vehicles in this, but there was also, we had the help of the Toyota Land Cruiser or the Land Cruiser Heritage Museum, which is not part of Toyota. Those guys were genuinely amazing. They were like, whatever you need. Like, I gave them a list of trucks, and they're like, well, the trucks in the museum are kind of tough to get in and out, so just let us know far in advance. And I gave them the list. Like, oh no, between the sort of management of the museum, like we own all of those, so we'll just give you our cars, and we have a friend that owns this one, and blah blah blah. Here, you carte blanche to do whatever. They were. I know cars are supposed to be about cars, but they really what I love. No, not almost as much because I hate people. One of the things that's nice about the car community is people and helping each other and community. And that Land Cruiser community there was amazing. So if you're ever in Salt Lake, go see the museum. The number of trucks in there is insane. So anyway.
Yeah, we could see on the screen, which was pretty cool.
And what you saw on the screen, that big long pan back was the one aisle of cars. There's another one, so there's 50% more cars than that on the one side, and then there's another room full of cars. It's huge. So yeah, we said, okay, well, if we can shoot at the Land Cruiser Heritage Museum and we have their help getting the old cars, this will be relatively easy. So call Toyota and I ask for a Land Cruiser, and I'm like, just please give me the one with the Heritage front end on it because I love
the circle lights.
Because I grew up in a FJ60, a US Spec 60 that we wound up moving to Germany with. That didn't last all that long. Once my dad was on the Autobahn and was like, this sucks.
In a 1940s Chevy motor.
1920s.
20s.
Yeah, 20s. 1927, I believe, was the Stovebolt 6 where that engine So
did he sell it in Germany?
And he bought an Audi 90 20 valve Quattro.
Oh.
Which was one of the fastest sedans you could buy.
Yes, now that he was driving on the Autobahn, he needed
it was no longer about
right
like
equipment.
I think I've told the story. Like he would just drag our neighbors up the hill in New York when they were all these yuppie assholes in their BMWs, and he would just kind of laugh and make fun of them and just put a tow rope and drag them up the hill. It was no longer about that. It was about who can I pass on an Autobahn.
So
and
I need 220 horsepower when. At that time, when a stand...
No, there was 170. There were
what? Oh, it wasn't a turbo.
They were not turbos.
Oh, I see.
No, it wasn't a turbo, but it did 134 miles an hour or something when, in 1991, when a lot of cars didn't.
Yeah.
And the Land Cruiser could barely hit 70. I mean, it would cruise at 70, but 75 was foot on the floor for quite a long time. Anyway.
The outer limit.
So the Heritage front end there's 1958 package front end, the round headlight really reminded me of that truck. So I get this thing and I'm so excited. And all I know about the new Land Cruiser is it's smaller and cheaper. Mm-hmm. And I immediately delve into the specs after I asked Toyota for the truck, and they were, we had a delivery date set. And I'm like, wait a second. It's smaller. It's actually bigger than the last truck.
Than the 200 series.
Than the 200 series. So this new one's called the 250 series. And so inside baseball, we'll get to it in a second, but the Land Cruiser station wagon lineage, which is one of 3 big branches of the Land Cruiser family tree, is the Land Cruiser we all think of in the U.S. And that started with technically the 55 series, which was around for a while but didn't sell well. But then the 60 that I sort of grew up in, 60 gave way to 80, gave way to 100, then 200, and now 300. The 300 series Land Cruiser is only for sale in America as the Lexus LX600 and now 700H. And then one of the other branches that's around the world is the Prado branch. And the Prado is the sort of lighter duty cars, which are typically smaller and less heavy duty. They're sort of more on-road focused, although they're still very much live axles, a lot of, off-roady stuff. The new Land Cruiser is a 250, which is on the Prado lineage. So it's not a full Land Cruiser. The LX is. But I start looking into this, and I was like, wait, 112-inch wheelbase. No, 106. 112. Like, that's the same as the old car. And I start digging in. The fucking thing is bigger than the last Land Cruiser.
The 200.
And that really upset me because I went back and I looked, and sure enough, Motor Trend calls it downsized, and Car and Driver called it smaller. And like every YouTuber in the world is like, it's smaller. You have one job, guys. Get the facts straight.
Right.
So that I thought, that's really strange.
And where did that misinformation originate? Is that a Toyota thing, or is that a thing because it's based on a Prado, so everyone assumes it's smaller? Or?
Well, Toyota never said it was based on a Prado, right? Toyota never talked about that in the U.S. And I'm certain that I'm not certain. I would bet good money that Toyota never said it was smaller.
Yeah, that doesn't behoove them to do
They're
that.
They're not gonna make a factual mistake. The car feels so much smaller, and I think that's where it came from. Like I would have genuinely, when you get in it, you think it's 2 full sizes smaller than the last one, because the last one was a behemoth. And what is really interesting is now when you look at the specs, in wheelbase, length, width, and height, it's bigger or identical. It's within, I think it's 1/10 of an inch narrower than the old car. It's the same size as the old truck, and so is the LX. So that was my first wait, what is going on here? The LX.
So the Lexus GX and LX are now the same size.
But they're not. Because when you look if you look from the back of the car and you look at the tumble home, what Toyota has done is make their cars have the same track and the same width, but the greenhouse is a lot narrower. So they've moved the seats closer together, and you can see that reflected in all of the interior measurements of shoulder width and everything else. So they made a scrunched feeling interior by just bringing the glass in basically up top, which is
the tumble home angled, or is it have hips?
It's got hips. It's got big hips, and that's the thing is.
So the cockpit's narrower than the car. This is like the thing, like an old 911. Like old cars are like this. Yeah. Jag XJ6s, where there's this thickness to the lower body.
The last Jag XJ, which was actually an XF underneath. And so what they did was give it big hips, but kept the glass. So you know that car had those weird blacked out
C pillars.
Yeah. That was to mask the fact that the greenhouse of the car was a full size and a half narrower than the underside of the car.
I mean, that's an XJ trait since the beginning. XJs have always had narrower greenhouses than the rest of the car. And big hips,
which you kind of want. But when you look at the Land Cruiser and the new GX, you see they have really narrow greenhouse and then wide hips and then fender flares on top of that. And so the interior of the car feels way smaller and is way smaller than an LX, even though the exterior dimensions are the same. So that I was like, what TF is Toyota doing? Like, I'm very confused by this. I like the way it looked, but I just kept thinking, like, this is a RAV4. This kind of just looks like a butched up RAV4.
Do you feel that way about a 4Runner?
The new one? Or previously?
Like the current one?
Well, there's a brand new one.
There's a brand new one?
There's a brand new one that you probably haven't seen on the road yet. But which is also a 250 series. They're all the same truck now. But no, I always felt like a 4Runner and a Land Cruiser looked butch.
Yes.
Like they looked big and bulky and
there was no mistaking it for family lineage that had anything to do with RAV4. That's for sure.
Right, flagship. It just looked like this is a real deal body on frame SUV, and the new one is real deal body on frame SUV. So the first one that I got from Toyota had the square headlights, and I just didn't like it. The way it looks. Got in it, I was like, okay, it feels really small and cheap in here, and it was $70,000, the one that I had, and I started driving it around and immediately dismissed it. Like, we're done. And the first notes that I wrote is, Plano, we have a problem. Because
Plano being
the headquarters of
Toyota in USA.
I'm a big fan of 4-cylinders. 4-cylinders done well are amazing. They're responsive and they're
However,
this is the worst 4-cylinder in the currently on the market in the US. And so what Toyota did was put this turbocharged 2.4 liter 4-cylinder with a hybrid system in it. And so
what else is it used in, if anything?
Tacoma, the Turbo 2.4 is
without
Tacoma,
the hybrid system.
Without the hybrid system, and it's rude. I mean, it is really genuinely a rude sounding engine. I described in the video as sounding broken, and I did actually open the hood at one point to see what the hell was going on, because even at idle, it's got some weird sort of random clicking sounds and banging sounds that are from fuel pump and high pressure fuel pump up there, and then injectors, and you hear it bouncing off like tunnel walls and other cars, and it just sounds broken. But the biggest issue is that it's a 8-speed automatic. And it keeps it in this like, under 2,500 RPM rev range. It's got an electric motor that really helps it out. So it feels like it's got a lot of torque, and keeps the engine revs low. And oh my God, it literally excites the steering column. So there's
how's that for perceived quality?
Not good in a $70,000 truck. Not coming from a V8 Land Cruiser, right? So Land Cruisers were always, before the V8s, they were always slow as shit, right? And they were panned in the press for being unrefined, that 6-cylinder was unrefined. And, the car was stressed at 80 miles an hour. Lord.
Before the 24 valve. Imagine the 24 valve 6 was
better, yeah. Fair point. But no one knew what was coming. I mean, an unrefined straight 6 out of an FJ40 or something is a Rolls-Royce engine compared to today's high compression. Modern engines are just not smooth. And so there's a hill that separates Marin County and San Francisco that as you're going south towards the Golden Gate Bridge from Marin, it's called the Waldo-grade, and it's a 55 zone, and it's a pretty big climb. 500 feet climb?
Probably more. I don't
even know. But like something like Beatrice, that car is foot on the floor in fifth gear at 70 miles an hour to maintain speed. It's a big grade. The Land Cruiser downshifted 1 gear or 2 gears and just stayed at like 1900 RPM, but buzzed my hands to the point where the first time I did this, I knocked it into a lower gear. I'm like, are you serious right now? And I thought, surely this has to be just this one car, right? I mean, like, there's no way this passed. Like, there's something wrong with this car. So I did not care for the way it drove. I didn't care for the ride quality. I didn't care for any of it. And it's not terrible, let me be honest, but I just thought, no. I remember what that 200 was like. That was like flagship. The reason that the LX could exist is the Land Cruiser was so good, they could slap a Lexus badge on it.
Right.
And it was just up
credible
to the task.
Yeah, it was believable.
And so then I got home and I start doing my sort of normal test. I sit in the back seat and I'm like, wait a second, this doesn't feel any bigger than the Golf. And so I jump out of it and jump into my e-Golf and I'm like, it's not. Like it's got the same size back seat as a Golf. Okay. Remembering that it's still the same size as the old 200, which was fucking enormous inside. And then I open the trunk, the hatch, and there's a 4-inch high, or more than that, I think it's more than 4-inch high battery sitting on top of the trunk floor, and there's no third row. And so I realized that the cargo box is only about as tall as the Golfs. It's actually, I think it was less tall than the Golfs, and it's a little bit bigger, but we're going from a subcompact hatch to a full-size truck here, and I don't think it could fit anything that I couldn't fit in the Golf. And I'm like, yeah, height-wise, what the fuck is going on? And where's the third row? So I started just doing a lot of research on specs and whatever, and I called Toyota. And so I called Anthony Esposito, and I'm like, I think we have a problem. Like, I'm not doing icons on this car. Like, I don't like shitting on cars anyway. It's not
in public forums, especially.
It's just not as fun as you think it is, right?
Yeah.
You know, you're hurting people and you're hurting companies that are made of people, and I don't like that. And so I called Toyota, and I'm like, help, can I have a GX? And typically the answer to that question would be no, because, you know, Toyota, like most companies, their divisions are separated from one another. And the PR people from one brand aren't going to help you with their competitor brand. Toyota's PR department, the people that I deal with are like amazing. And like, yeah, what do you need? I'm like, GX, any GX, don't care. And this person was like, yeah, okay. I know what's going on. And I'm like, really? And I'm like, I just want to experience the GX because we have a little bit of a problem. And a GX showed up that day, same day, which tells me like, okay, Toyota knows what's going on. Like, it pulls up. There's a fleet management company, and the guy that pulls up parks them right next to each other. And I have a picture of this. And I start chatting with him, and he's like, oh man, that GX is so good. And they're not supposed to ever say anything bad about any car. But I'm like, all right, tell me what he's like, there's just no contest between the two cars. And I'm like, okay, I haven't even gotten the GX yet before. And he's like, I'm, kind of bummed that I have to get back in the Land Cruiser. I'm like, they're the same car, right? And he was like, no, they're different. That's the GX. That's a different lineage. That's like, the old GX. And I'm like, no, look at them. Like, look closely at the two cars. They're identical. And he's like, oh yeah, I guess the doors are similar. The doors are, they're the same. He had no idea. And this is a person who had spent a lot of time in both trucks. They look that much different from each other. And then I drove it. I was like, no wonder he didn't think they were the same car. So these two cars were $1,200 apart. It was a fairly base GX and a fairly well-loaded Land Cruiser. And honestly, the interior felt $10,000 apart. And that V6, so the GX is the same truck, but as a 10-speed auto, with the V6
instead of a hybrid 4.
Instead of a hybrid 4 with the 8-speed. Am I getting these backwards? Yeah, no, the Toyota's the new 8-speed, the Lexus is the old 10. And I never liked that Lexus transmission. It's not smooth. It just doesn't particularly care for it. But it keeps that V6 out of its terrible rev range. The V6, same family of engines as the 4-cylinder, so probably the same pistons and all the same sort of design. Terrible. Also one of the rudest, coarsest V6s on the market. But of course, V6 has got nothing on a really bad 4-cylinder, first of all. And this thing is in normal driving in that 2,000 RPM window where the 4-cylinder is literally buzzing your hands like a vibrator. You can't even hear this thing run. Like it doesn't even exist. The suspension tuning was totally different. The thing floated over everything with just the right amount of float. And the interior just felt better. Aside from a couple little niggles with UX stuff that I couldn't find a trip odometer or MPG on the Lexus, like weird stuff like that. Night and day difference.
Third row?
That was the other thing. Then I get in the back, and not only does the Lexus have a third row seat, but folded, the third row seat the cargo floor was 4 inches lower than the Toyota's was.
Because there's no battery.
Because there's no battery there. So I'm like, wait a second. So I get 4 inches more cargo space and a third row. So,
And a much better powertrain. And it's, what did you say, $1,200 more?
It was $1,200 difference. Yeah. And they were comparably equipped. I mean, there were a couple things that Toyota had, like electronically disconnectable sway bars, which, let's be honest here, no one's using. Mm-hmm. But basically same stuff. The stereos in the car, like the Lexus was way better. Like it was just, everything was better. And I thought, all right. So then I called Toyota and I was like, can I in Utah have both cars plus an LX? And there was no LX. There was nothing available in the fleet, but they did give me both cars. And that allowed me to write the script on this, which was, if you haven't seen the icons yet, I made the title, How Did Toyota Get This Wrong? Or How Toyota Got the Land Cruiser So Wrong. Because it's all choices that were not made in the Lexus. That GX, right after we were done filming, Motor One declares it the SUV of the year and possibly the best SUV of all time. Not quite going that far, but the thing's spectacular. And so it was a really interesting
exercise in brand engineering.
Right. Well, I mean, you wonder, like, did Toyota put the 4-cylinder in because the Lexus had to be better? Or did they put it in because they needed the fuel economy credits for CAFE? Or do customers demand better city fuel economy? I don't know. All I know is if you're going to do a 4-cylinder, like even Defender, like the Defender has a 2-liter 4-cylinder as an option. It's fine. It's completely, not Defender. Yeah. Hold on. Why am I having a stroke? Am I blinking chronologically?
Yes, you are.
Yeah, like Land Rover's 2-liter 4-cylinder is goes away. You don't even notice it. And your foot on the floor
which is what
merging.
you want, because nobody wants to hear 4-cylinder noises in something that's supposed to be powerful and effortless.
Yeah. So we get to Utah, and I got to drive all of the old stuff, which was stuff I had never done. So there, the specs were a little bit different on those cars. The Lexus was the Overtrail Plus, which is literally the absolute fullest spec, highest, most expensive GX you can buy. And the Land Cruiser we had was more base. And so it skewed the whole thing a little bit in a way that I didn't like. Plus the Overtrail Plus doesn't have a rear seat. So we show the height difference, but we couldn't show it when there's a seat in place. So the script got a little bit wonky once we were there on the ground. But it was just everyone, Anthony Esposito drove the Land Cruiser first. And he's like, yeah, I don't like it. It's not great. Like, it's not that bad. And then that night, so we drove to the shoot location. We were site scouting. And then that night drove the GX back. And he is not even out of the car. The door swings open. He goes, you would have to be a fucking idiot to buy that Land Cruiser. And we're right in front of Land Cruiser people. And we're like, shit, hi. And one of the guys that we worked with was like, yeah, no, I just bought a 250. And I'm like, oh shit, we offended him. He's like, but of course I bought the GX because, so even, sort of word has gotten out in the Land Cruiser community.
Well, at least there is a solution, because so often when there's something that's shitty that is just delivered to you by the manufacturer, you're like, man, they got it so close. It would have been amazing if they did. It's not an if they did it. They did do it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't actually, the faithful say, well, the thing needs a V8. Yeah, fine. I'm here for that. Like, that's okay. But actually the 6 is good enough. Mm-hmm. It's terribly unrefined for a modern car. The 4 feels super zippy and quick off the line. Like, you don't really notice the lag because the electric motor fills in for it. And then you go to make a pass. Like, we have one shot that wound up in the episode. You can watch the speedometer just basically stop at like 68. Like, the thing is so fucking slow at the top of the rev range because the electric motor is now out of its operating band. So it fills in, it's like torque fill, and then down low, and then nobody home. Whereas the V6 just keeps pulling and pulling. And they're 23 horsepower apart from each other. But the Lexus is 1.6 seconds quicker to 60. Yeah. Like, and by the way, that's the area where the Toyota does well because it's got all that, off the line grunt. The difference, you floor the two of them at 60, and honestly, if you were in the GX, I don't think you'd even be able to tell if the Land Cruiser driver had hit the gas or not. Yeah. Like, it's that difference. Yeah. That much of a difference. So, then we're like, but once we see, like, if there's a solution, I can make this episode work. And I agree with Anthony, though. I don't want to say you'd have to be an idiot to buy a Land Cruiser, but I will say I'm not sure I could come up with any reasonable use case that the Land Cruiser makes more sense than the GX, but makes any sense at all compared to the, like
it's not a plug-in. It's not just looking here for.
I mean, fuel economy.
Helpful.
Yeah, if city fuel economy is better for you, but I'm sorry, if you live in a city, you can have a 200-inch long car without a third row and no cargo capacity. I mean, like, come on.
Yeah, sure, fair.
It just doesn't. The whole package doesn't make sense. Plus, the way that GX looks. Did you see that thing?
I saw it. Yeah.
Did it not like make your loins do?
No, I mean, I was just really delighted by the fascia of the Land Cruiser, and I was disappointed the Lexus didn't have that.
Because the front round headlights?
Yeah.
I also wanted a Defender. So another inside thing, we were going to get a Land Rover because it looks like the daytime running lights are identical, but we couldn't get one.
Yeah.
We just ran out of bodies to move cars around. But the Land Cruiser story, so I went in the episode, I would go into the Land Cruiser story, which, I again, grew up in one. Even I don't think I realized how many different Land Cruiser models.
Right. And the origin. You mentioned the Jeep, because the J and BJ and whatever FJ all stands for Jeep. Do you know what didn't, or I was surprised this didn't make it in the episode if you did come across this, but maybe you didn't. I learned this from my dad. Maybe I should fact check it, in fact, because I learned it from my dad. Do you know what Jeep stands for?
Yes, the word Jeep is from another abbreviation of.
Yes.
It's a G. It's a G word. It didn't make it in the episode.
GP. General purpose.
Yeah, general purpose.
Yeah, and then that became Jeep.
Jeep. Yeah. So all Land Cruisers have a chassis number, like a chassis code. They all have J in them. So the way the chassis codes work is you have engine code first, so engine family, then J for Jeep, and then a series number. And so the original Land Cruiser started as the BJ. And of course, one of my friends points out, as is so often the case, it all started with a BJ. And I was like, oh God.
So probably know who that was.
You might not. It's actually an old friend from Pennsylvania who just made you laugh. But actually, it started from the U.S. military, right? So the U.S. military needed...
Which is where the Land Rover started, too.
Did it? Because I was not able to verify that.
So the story with the Land Rover Jeep origin was that Rover cars wanted to make cars, and in order to do that, you needed steel, and steel was still controlled by the government, and you were able to get steel if you got it allocated to you by the government because you had exported something, because the UK had spent all of its money waging war, and so they were really looking to sell things overseas so they could get foreign currency. So you needed to have a record of exporting things in order to get steel to make cars. And so Land Rover was like, what can we make to export that we can sell right now so we can get steel to make cars? And they said, let's make a small aluminum utility vehicle. And this was inspired. Spencer Wilkes, who designed the Land Rover, had a Jeep on his farm in Anglesey, which was a military Jeep from the U.S. that was left over from World War II. This is like 1946, 47. And he was like, maybe we should just make a thing like this that we can sell to people as they're rebuilding Europe. That's not that steel intensive. And so the Jeep did inspire the creation of the Land Rover.
So why was it aluminum?
Because they couldn't get steel. They needed, what can we make something out of not steel to sell so that we can get steel to make cars?
That's cool. But it was never used by military, right?
The Land Rover?
Never U.S., obviously.
Never U.S.
We would have lost every war.
The British certainly used it for military it was designed it came out in 1948 in Amsterdam. So it was used for military purposes afterwards. But it was inspired because the designer of the Land Rover owned a Jeep.
A U.S. Jeep.
Yes, a U.S. Jeep from World War II that he would drive around his farm in.
So I love this. By the way, Land Cruiser was very clearly, I'd said that in the video.
Yeah.
It was just, what word could would sound with all the, I think he wanted the prestige. No, it was not the prestige. Whatever the sort of
synonym
project
for Rover, in other words.
Basically, a synonym for Rover, because he wanted it to sound very much like Land Rover. So the U.S. military needed locally produced. The U.S. military had still occupied Japan after World War II. Korean War breaks out. The U.S. government sends a sort of memo out to Japanese car manufacturers and said, hey, will somebody build us a Jeep? Mitsubishi won the contract with, they were just building a Willys CJ.
And this, were they called the Patrol, or that came along later? Or
I don't think it was the Patrol. I think it was
that's Nissan anyway.
Yes. Good point. It was just a Jeep. It was just a Mitsubishi, but it said some of them had Mitsubishi logos on them, some didn't, from what I saw. I'm not an expert on that. But Toyota did create this BJ, and the BJ was quite different, actually. It was bigger than the Jeep, substantially bigger and way tougher. And what they thought was that the plan was keep it simple, right? This is Toyota's philosophy always to this day.
So no low range.
So it didn't need it. So the motor that they had ready to go was this enormous 3.437. It was a very big straight six. So Toyota had been building the Stovebolt, the General Motors inline six, for years under license. And then they developed their own, they just updated it basically. And that's the B series. So B plus J for Jeep. And so they made the car, they engineered it. There was so much low end torque from the straight six when everything else used tiny little four cylinders that they were like, we don't even need a low range, which makes it therefore
simpler, less stuff
and
to break.
Less shit to break. I mean, and it was all like redundant, amazingly redundant stuff. Like if the starter solenoid broke, there was a manual way to start the car. Like it was just really, really well thought out. And they did a couple of really...
Land Rover did that too, for different reasons.
Right, because they needed it.
Because it was Lucas.
But serviceability and longevity was really it. And their thought was like, it doesn't need to get you to the battlefield. It just really does need to get you home. And so they kept it super simple. They did a bunch of publicity stunts. One was they tried to climb... Okay, this is months ago now.
The stairs.
The stairs. And it's hilarious. I wish it just artistically didn't work in the video, but there's a picture of this ridiculously steep stone staircase with a handrail right in the middle of it. And apparently they went to go do this stunt and were like, nah, fuck. There's somebody put a handrail here. So they drove up Mount Fuji instead. I mean, and they had climbed higher than any other truck it ever had. So they marketed it as the Toyota-Jeep BJ. And then Willis Overland sued them, or trademarked the name Jeep with a capital J as a brand, and then called Toyota and was like, hey, you got to drop this. So that's when they came up with the name spelled Rando Kuruza, Rando Kuruza, which I love seeing. I love languages and I love accents. So they came up with the name Rando Kuruza, and that was it. BJ became FJ eventually.
I thought you were going to say HJ. Never mind. Okay.
HJ is often before BJ.
Yes, that's true. Confusingly because it's not alphabetized, but... Such is life. Not alphabetized.
We're done here. And then they did a big update to the engine, giving it a couple extra bearings, and it became the F Series. And that engine was in production for about 2 million years.
Let's see, probably 91 or something like that was the last year of the... I have... Because that's the 24-valve engine was supposed to be ready when the 80 series came out. It wasn't quite done in time, so the first few years of the 80 series, they had the old engine.
F-series, yeah. That, I think the script was 3,400 words, and I have 12,000 words with the notes. Yeah. I mean, there's so much to this story.
I know. Videos are always like this, where you're just like, man, there's so much cool stuff you want to include, and you just have to decide what.
The crazy thing to me, though, is, and I point this out, like, 1957 is the year the first Land Cruiser arrived in America, from 1958 model year, so that's why we have the 58 Heritage Edition, and, blah, blah, blah. But, at that point, the number, I said it in the episode, I think it was 7,000 cars or something, were the grand total of all vehicles exported out of Japan. Like the Japanese car industry was non-existent, but a third of those cars were already 40 series. I don't think they were 40s yet. I think they were FJ 20s. So BJ became 20, which became 40. And the 40 series was in production for 40 years. That's the sort of Jeep. Think of that as the Wrangler. Yeah. And that, I mean, it won every comparison test I could find on it. I mean, it was just basically indestructible. And okay, I did get a little bit of shit in the comments about using the word indestructible. Nothing is indestructible. But
why did people... you don't literally mean it's indestructible.
Correct. I don't literally mean it. But
nobody ever... The word indestructible should never appear in any automotive journalism and be construed literally, because every vehicle can be destructible.
Everything can be destructed. Look, we've destroyed planet Earth.
Yes. There you go.
Come on. Some people might deny that that's happening. But yes, People will fight about anything.
Okay.
But yeah, no, they were just incredibly tough.
You're elevating discourse. You're getting people to argue about semantics instead of like politics or positionality. So that's a
win.
Progress.
Yeah, great. Yeah. So 40 Series was, the sort of car that cemented Land Rover. And it was very, very basic stuff. Leaf springs, solid axles, but really tough. And Toyota commissioned a bunch of studies. Actually, it wasn't Toyota. It was one of the off-road magazines that did a user study. And more than half of Land Cruiser owners in America use them solely for off-roading and recreation. These were not daily drivers.
What? This is like in the 60s?
This must have been in the 60s. Yeah, because 58 the car came out.
That makes sense philosophically because the Wagoneer came out in like 1964.
None of that had happened.
Yeah, and so that survey makes sense to have occurred before the sort of transition of these things becoming sort of used on the street with the Wagoneer, the Bronco, and the Range Rover.
They all happened because these companies
and the Scout.
Yeah, Scout especially, realized that if all you have to do is put a station wagon body onto a chassis of they were called off-roaders, right?
Yeah.
Or they were called four-wheel drives.
Yeah, which you're envisioning something that's shaped like a Wrangler or a Jeep or
Exactly.
a 40 series, two-door 40 series or a Defender 90 with no roof on it.
And where Toyota's problem started with this whole lineage of cars is when Jeep came out with their big station wagon bodied car and all these other cars came out. Wagoneer. They came up with a new name for it.
Right.
And Toyota didn't.
Yes.
Toyota just called it the Land Cruiser and sold 40 and 55 side by side. 55 is now nicknamed the Iron Pig. It is not a pretty vehicle. It is. You've probably never even seen.
No, I know what it looks like.
In person,
It's
right?
got the tapering hood and the squared fenders,
Yeah.
but it's a station wagon body.
Yeah. And it was for sale, I think, for 8 years, and it did not do well. And I can see why. It was just awkward looking.
Yeah, it doesn't have the refinement of the aesthetic, which is this sort of blocky, unitary looking look of a Bronco or a Range Rover or a Scout.
Well, and that would make sense because it wasn't designed by a designer. It was done by the engineers. Mm-hmm. In the same way, I guess, the G-Wagon was, but obviously someone with an aesthetic eye. But... and so it all changed in 1980 when the 60 series came out. And so 60 was available. Like all these series, there are different variants. There's a 60, there's a 61. 61's a high roof one. There's 62, 63, whatever, blah, blah, blah. So in the U.S., it was sold as an FJ60, so F series straight six, 4.2.
This is the one you grew up
carbureted,
in?
the one I grew up in.
And then they did a facelift where it got 4 rectangular
Which
headlights.
I hated.
Yeah,
I never liked
with
that.
the round lights.
I like
it really looks quite a bit like a Range Rover, the
That's
FJ60.
Trivia, first car I ever drove with a stick shift. My dad was an FJ60. My dad bet me that I couldn't even back it out of the driveway. And I said, I'll drive into town. And he was like, what? Are you kidding? It's a stick shift, Jason. And I'm like, I'll drive into town. $50. He never paid me the $50. In fact, Dad, you owe me $50.
You recovered it with interest subsequently.
With the Scirocco purchase, yeah. No, so I mean, but that was what I grew up in. And it was just bare bones by today's standards, but it was a luxury. It was a Range Rover. There we go, another one. Land Rover comes out with Range Rover, a whole new lineage of cars.
To indicate to you that it's really intended to have a very different,
it's a different
mission
product.
and purpose. Yeah.
I mean, who names the same product?
Which was somewhat awkward because the Range Rover was made by Land Rover, but
yeah, that was a marketing, like a naming screw up. Like you shouldn't do that. It's very confusing.
Yeah,
but
but we are used to it now, and we know what it means.
Mostly. Do you? I don't think that most people realize that like a Range
Discovery
Rover,
and and the Range Rover has proliferated down market in a way that now there's the Evoque and the Sport.
So what's the difference between a Range Rover Sport and
a Discovery
and an Evoque and a this? I mean half the time I can't
Range Rover Sport and Evoque I'm good at. Discovery less clear to me now.
And then
Velar,
which one is Velar, right?
Yeah,
Velar
is a Jaguar. Apparently,
a Jaguar
that
chassis,
confused me greatly. But
I mean, Jeep has done an amazing job. So we think, all right, Compass, the Cummy Pissy one. Come on, you didn't even laugh. We know that Wrangler is the real Jeep, so to speak, right? That's the Jeep. That's the
Cherokee,
not the real Jeep, but the progenitor of that sort of species.
The origin of the
right. And then you have a Cherokee, you have a Grand Cherokee, you have a Wagoneer, you have all these different products that have their own brand identities but fall under Jeep, and Toyota just completely fucked that up.
Yeah, sure.
And so but
Prado kind of does it in other markets, but
Prado,
not here.
What happened was. Which one was it? 70. No, there was no 70. 70 was, there was a 70 series. Land Rover that replaced the 40.
Land Cruiser.
Oh God, sorry. See what I mean? So yeah, 40 was the Wrangler, right? The original Wrangler, replaced in the 93. In the 1990s with a 70 series. Same idea. Like, okay, this is Wrangler Gen 2. Think of it that way. And it was just brutal on the road, right? You know, leaf springs, solid
Still
axles.
with leaf springs.
Yeah. And so
because the original Land Rover got rid of leaf springs in 1984.
So the thing about so when we think of like, you know, Land Cruiser, these are stealth wealth rich people vehicles, right?
Yes.
The 40 series was used in like both military and civilian applications, but really where there were no roads.
Yes, you see them in UN livery. You see them being used on both sides. You see the terrorists and UN and the Allies all using them.
Yep. And so they had to be just tough as nails, and any concession to off-road durability and usability was just never going to happen. So what Toyota did was wisely split the 70 series into the heavy duty, which is the traditional Wrangler stuff, and then the light duty stuff. Light duty, I need to stress, is not light duty.
Right.
It's less heavy duty, right? And so the first thing that happened was they put coil springs in the front of the first light duty 70 series. That spin-off from the Wrangler tree
is what eventually became the
Prado.
GX here.
Well, it became Prado,
Yes,
right?
which is a GX.
And the only Prado that's ever been sold here as a Toyota was the FJ Cruiser. The FJ Cruiser was actually a Prado.
Right.
It was a 150.
Sold as a Toyota, correct. Right. But it was sold as a Lexus for decades.
Yeah, as a GX. We've had two generations of GX, and they were both Prados on that. They were 150s. One was 120, one was 150. I don't remember. So the Prado lineage went 70, 90, 120, 150, and now 250. And these are lighter duty. And eventually they inherited, so they went from leaf springs to coil springs, and then independent front suspension, right? God. And then the sort of Land Cruiser faithful would be like, oh, it's just a Prado. But eventually all that stuff has trickled down to the real sort of stuff as it's proven its worth off-road.
Yes, as you make it possible to achieve the same things off-road with independent suspension.
Yeah. And so this Prado lineage is massive. I mean, the number of cars on this, the number of series and updates and whatever is just enormous. We've just never gotten them in the US. And so to wrap my head around where the hell this car fits in, you sort of have to really start thinking like, what the hell's the difference? And I have a picture that wound up in the video of me between two 70 series. One was a Prado and one wasn't. And the entire shoot, Anthony could not tell the difference between the two of them. And strangely, one of them has a tapered, so the fenders are sort of the same, and then one has a tapered sort of bonnet that sits above it with lights that are sitting on top, and the tapered bonnet is the non-Prado, and the full width one is the Prado. And like and then the cars are identical from the A-pillar back. They're identical, but there's this tiny little difference up front when you look underneath. One has coil springs, one has leaf springs, but you can't tell that from the top of the car. So it's just very confusing. Same thing with this Land Cruiser. So this Land Cruiser is a J250. I don't remember the engine code. It's something J250. It's J250.
Garbage, according to you.
Shit 4-cylinder, shit V6, but less shit V6. The Overtrail Plus Lexus that we had off-road actually has the 8-inch diff instead of the 7-inch diff or whatever that the other Prados have. So it's all a grab bag of like what the hell's underneath it and which one gets this diff and which one's heavier duty than that. They're all heavy duty, right? But the reason the Lexus can tow more is it's got more displacement, bigger engine, and also this bigger ring gear in the diff. That diff is the same as the 300s. I think it's, because there's a small and a big. So like, is that GX now still a Prado? Because it's a Prado that happens to ride on basically the same platform as the 300. I'm very glad I never watch Doug DeMuro stuff. Typically, zero offense to Doug. I just don't have time to sit and watch stuff. But I happened across his Land Cruiser thing the day before our video was going live. So it's done, it's edited, whatever. And I'm really glad I didn't see this earlier, but I'm glad I watched it. He did a really great video on why he doesn't like the Land Cruiser. And it was everything I said, which was kind of reassuring right before the video goes live, because of course I'm nervous, oh God, I hope I don't get it wrong, because I slammed this car pretty substantially. But Doug did say one other thing, and he said that I left out. It's a really good point. He's a Land Cruiser guy, right? He's owned a bunch of Land Cruisers. to him, one of the other defining characteristics of Land Cruiser was that it was the biggest, baddest, toughest flagship, period. And when you saw Land Cruiser, you know top of the line. And the problem now is the Tundra rides on the same platform as the Land Cruiser. It's also a 300. It's a 250 300. It's all the same shit. All of them are. And he's like, that's now the flagship? But hold on, the name Land Cruiser tells me, or has told me for a long time, this is the biggest, baddest, toughest. Right? And I thought that was a really good point. Oh, damn it, I should have put that in the video. Yeah. So, but we were taught that Land Cruiser means something, and Toyota just sort of kind of went a little bit away from that. And then the price is just...
Hopefully it's temporary, and it's nice to know that the 300 is available with a Lexus badge still, in North America.
In North America, yeah, you can get the real full size, full fat, even though they're all the same size, Land Cruiser as a Lexus.
Yeah, Stealth Wells is a really great way to put it. It's the quintessential. The place you would see it is winery owners drive around in it, right? Because they are wealthy and they own land in very valuable places, and they are making wine. It's all very bougie, but they are sort of farmers at sort of also, and so that image that they want to project, it's a winery owner, right? It's old money is a kind of the Land Cruiser vibe.
It's just somebody who doesn't really want to show off, right? Yes. Exactly.
It's the opposite of conspicuous.
Yeah, we didn't have vineyards where I grew up. We didn't have wineries where I grew up.
Yeah, but that's very, very typical here in, like, if you go into Napa or something like that, that's like a typical winery owner vehicle is a...
Over Range Rovers?
Yes, because it's more sort of, I'm of the earth, I'm relatable, I'm a farmer, As you're driving by your fields, Toyota, as you're driving by your fields with people harvesting in them, I don't know. That's just the vibe.
Yeah, interesting. Look, so the other cool thing for me, I never driven a 40 Series. It is a ox cart, exactly as you expect. Fair enough. Then I drove a 60. So the 60 Series that we had was a 61, so high roof, right-hand drive, and it was a diesel that is the holy grail diesel. It's fully mechanical, nothing electronic in the diesel at all. And the car was actually not manual, which I loved. Not as bad as I expected it to be. On the road, it was perfectly lovely. It was happy to cruise at 60 miles an hour, but 40 was not. 60 miles an hour was
the outer limit of re-entry.
And it wasn't that it couldn't go faster. It was that it's so wobbly and so directionally unstable that even with no one around, I thought I could just roll it. I just thought I could just roll. So I just kind of kept it to 45, 50 on this big, wide 2-lane dead straight road that we were filming near, when we had to transport between locations. I'm like, nope, that's it, 45 done. With a 60, I could do...
the bus, the VW bus.
Exactly. So I could do 60 miles on that thing. It was, kind of any more than that, you hear the engine moving around. But the 80, which is a car that I had never really had an affinity for.
Oh, it's so...
Stole my heart completely.
It's so different from a Range Rover Classic, which was available simultaneously. The Range Rover Classic feels like a shed.
Ancient.
Yeah, and the 80 series feels like driving a modern, I don't know. It feels very contemporary and manageable and car-like.
So this was a Japanese spec car, also right-hand drive, diesel, automatic, sadly. But the flush headlights and the clear corners and whatever just made that thing. And this one had a brush guard on it. And I just kind of melted looking at it. And I was like, why have I never been so sexually attracted to this 80 series before? It was just gorgeous. Yeah. And then I come outside.
And the functionality of it's really impressive. It's so refined and easy.
The amazing thing is 34 degrees outside in the morning. Car sat out all night. And it's a diesel, right? Yep. So I'm thinking... glow plug, blah, blah, it's going to be miserable in the morning. I've never experienced this in my life. I forgot. So I'm I loaded up and right-hand drive and I went to go get on the wrong side of the car initially and whatever, and I just sort of hop in and I turn the key. And as I'm turning the key, I'm like, oh shit, glow plugs. The thing started on the first compression stroke and full speed cranking. Yeah. So all of those diesels are 24 volts.
Really?
Yeah. So the 60 series...
The whole electrical system?
Right. Good question. The 60 series, the whole car is 24 volts. Everything. So you can't get a fucking headlight for it. You can't get a radio. You can't get a clock. You can't do anything.
You can't charge your device.
Very quickly. You can charge it very quickly. The 80 series, on the diesels, they kept a 24 volt system for the starter. So it's got two batteries that are run in series for the starter in parallel for everything else.
Huh.
So the rest of the car is 12 volts. But to get in a diesel at 30-something degrees in the morning and have it go and idle perfectly is something I've never experienced ever.
Yeah.
And it did it every single morning. Like we had the car multiple. First compression stroke. Ran perfectly. It was just unbelievable. And the difference in refinement, 60 is kind of raw and fun, but 80 is a real car.
Yeah. And it feels car-like in a way that a Range Rover does not.
You sit in it, and it's like my mom had a '93 Camry back in the day, and so that was my first speeding ticket was in that car, and so I spent a lot of time going very quickly in it, and I just felt immediately like, like I genuinely thought I was gonna get in the 60 and like have a moment, like emotionally tear up,
60,
because I haven't been in one since my dad's in probably '92, and there were things I noticed. I'm like, look at that. I forgot about this. The heater under the seat on the passenger side. In the back, there's a supplemental heater. And I remember used to burn the shit out of my toes when it was really cold out by just putting that on full hot. All these little things that I had totally forgotten about came back. But then I get in the 80 and I'm like, it's this wheel and these like amazing Toyota turn signal feel, and like the switch gear is magic, and the gauges are gorgeous, and this was just such a high mark, such a wonderful time for Toyota. And then the sound of the diesel, like this was a twin cam. It was twin cam, it was a single cam 24 valve diesel. Strange, I called it twin cam and then had to correct it in voiceover, which if you go back and watch it, you might be able to catch it. But yeah, no, it's. Man, we all wanted one. Just looking at it, we all wanted. And like,
it's quite impressive.
It's a big truck, but like Billy goated its way over whatever the hell we went through it. Like it
just feels so manageable.
Yeah.
That's the thing that most impressed me about it.
So you've driven plenty of 80s?
No, I've just driven 180 with a 24 valve, and then I have a lot of time, US market. And I have a lot of time in Range Rover Classics and Defenders from the same era.
Classics I have a lot of time in them, but like they were just ancient.
Yeah.
I mean, by comparison.
Yeah, by comparison, they are ancient. I mean, it was very sophisticated stuff in 1970, but by 1995, less so.
Another weird thing that I put in the script that I sort of didn't really fit, and when Ant and I was originally going through the script, he's like, does this really need to be there? And I thought it was really telling, so I kept it. When the 60 came out, Toyota had sold like 1.95 something million Land Cruisers worldwide. Like it was just, I'm sorry, when the 80 came, I said the 80, when the 80 came out. So at the end of the run of the 60, the total Land Cruiser sales worldwide were 2 million. And the total number of Land Cruisers sold in the UK was, okay, this is at the point where we put text on the screen because I don't remember what it was, but it was like 1,200 cars or something. It was like genuinely
You're in Range Rover territory.
Yeah, zero.
Yeah.
And they didn't take any of it serious. So when I saw that, I thought this is weird. And I went back and got thank God for eBay, bought all of the UK reviews from the magazine of all the 60 series and the 80 series. And the 60, they just criticized up, down, left, and right for being plasticky and shitty. And now it was tougher than the Range Rover, but they never used these as like, crossing the Grand Canyon vehicles. These were like, we've left the farm and we're going to shops. Yeah. And so the Range Rover was more plush. It had a V8 instead of this straight six. And the ancient 6 was really slow, and the V8 was slow, but it wasn't that slow. And they just shit all over the 60 series in ways that I was staggering to see, because the 60 got really good reviews in the US, like really good reviews. And then the 80 came out, and the initial reviews were like, well, it was marshmallow puffed up and it looked terrible. But when it was at Tokyo Auto Show, like it's another ugly Japanese car, basically was what they were saying. Mm-hmm. And then they drove it and they were like, we were so wrong.
The British journalists.
Yeah. That was interesting to see, where they're like, it just out Range Rover's Range Rover.
Yeah.
And so that was the tipping point.
Yeah. Certainly in terms of driving experience, I don't think it's very good looking, the 80 series personally, but I think
Euro guy in like sort of JDM or
included. There's one that I bicycle by every time I go bicycling, and I don't know. I think that it's
a US car.
It's right hand drive and it's diesel.
Oh, really? Okay, cool.
But I don't know. It just looks overinflated. The features it's too. I don't know. It's just not. I think aesthetically it's not successful, but that's not what it's for. And then the moment you drive it, you're just like, I don't really care what it looks like.
It could
it's
also
such
be
a nice thing to
the
drive.
one that we were on had big knobbly tires and the brush guard.
Yes.
It was spectacular looking. Plus, it was a little bit JRG in color, which never hurts.
Right.
Yeah. No, I fell in love with that. I actually was like, I could have one of these. Like, I could totally have one, and then 2 batteries.
Well, they're so expensive.
Are they really?
Well, if you find one that has lockers, everyone wants the ones with locking differentials, and they're a lot more expensive than ones that don't have them. That's one of the big value drivers in 80 series when you see them for sale. But I mean, they've definitely crossed that chasm of radwood stuff that a lot of them got used up, and so if you find a nice one, they're really expensive, especially if it's got all the stuff on it that you want it to. So yeah, they've gotten expensive.
Okay, deservedly though.
Yes,
like
definitely.
wow, what a really nice car. And to have a diesel that starts on the first compression stroke.
Yeah, unfortunately, the U.S. ones, none of them were diesels, but now you can bring them over because they're over 25 years old.
Yeah, very cool. That was very cool. I mean, the 100 series I liked quite a lot. The 200 I didn't. 200 was just too big. It was the same size. They've all been the same size. It just got so bloated, and I thought the styling was the first time it didn't look premium, the 200. I just thought it was...
It's kind of got that overwrought, like, modern car styling thing going on.
It wasn't even that it was overwrought to me. It was just cheap looking. Like, it just was dumbed down. Like, it could look like it could have been an insurance, like, one of those CGI'd insurance Photoshop rendering.
Yeah.
Like, this is truck.
Yeah.
But I think the new one, the new 300...
The 100 has a similarly loyal following, and I think the 100 Land Cruiser especially, I think the front end's less fussy looking with than the Lexus, which has 4 headlights. But those are definitely getting collectible too, because they just do this thing that's really, they're pleasant to use and obviously very capable as well.
I wound up adding the whole idea of effortlessness into the script at one point. Because
I think that's important. It helps highlight why the current one fails and also explains what is part of the formula of the Land Cruiser.
The whole idea, Land Crusher as its nickname, like nothing should want to stop this. And the idea that it's buzzing my hand off just going up a hill and that it just doesn't want to keep up with traffic. And if I pull out to pass someone, it's not, look, 60s were all slow. All the FJs were really slow, but you knew what you were getting. The sort of turbo hybrid thing that runs out of puff at higher revs, it fools you into thinking the car is going to move, and it doesn't. And I don't like that bait and switch on something that's a $70,000
Yes, it's under-delivering. It's over-promising and under-delivering.
Right, which is actually, that's a really good point. That's always the opposite of what Land Cruisers did, right? They just sat there and just didn't look like anything.
Yeah, it looks like utility and like sort of, I think that's true of the 80s styling. Like it's sort of like, I don't mind this, and then you use it and you're like, okay, now I get
really
it.
Good. Yeah.
It's meant for the person who is using it rather than for curb appeal or the visual enjoyment of people you're going by.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just love that they last, 400,000 or 500,000 miles. I mean, there was doing research for a bunch of interviews with project leads of the earlier cars, and they were talking about 900,000 kilometers for minimum service life on the engines, and designing in multiple rebuilds if anything did happen to it. But basically, their goal was to make the toughest vehicle in the world, and I should have. I wish Google Docs was easier to search, because it's a great quote. He said, there was an ad that was done in 1970 for Land Cruiser that said, "We'll know how long they last." In the 70s, I should say. We'll know how long they last when the first one wears out, which was great. Yeah. But actually, that was their mission. It was basically he said, if we've done our job, then there will be cockroaches and Land Cruisers left, is basically what he said. And they've done their job. Yeah. Things are tough as nails. A cool thing that I never thought I would really care about.
I always enjoy having an occasion to go down some path that I never have before. So if that's because we have to sell one or because I'm writing a auction catalog description for one or something, but anytime I have an excuse to learn and do like a deep dive on something that I never bothered to do before, I always get a lot of value out of that. Yeah. There's always some next frontier of stuff that we haven't learned, despite the fact that it's like our job to know stuff. Yeah. There's always something we don't know, and it's nice to have.
Well, hold on. If you'd like to learn more about Land Cruiser, hold on. I forgot.
I have.
There's all the comparison, all the tests. Look, this is how long series. Land Cruiser's been going on. There are 2 volumes of this Brooklyn's book, 56 to 87, and then 88 to 97. This book costs more than most of my cars.
Really?
This is like the Land Cruiser Legend. This is
Why
the
is
Bible.
why is it so expensive? Because it's been out of print for a while.
I have no idea, but I found one and
Okay, so
we
this is a
expense
Prado, or is that not a Prado? That's
that is
not a Prado.
Not a Prado.
But it is a 70
No,
series.
it's 70, I think. But I don't remember which is which on the front end. I'm pretty sure the Prado had the Prado I think was the full width.
Okay.
When you look at the part of that video, it was the one on my left, on my right, when the screen left was the Prado. And I think it was, I think the Prado has the narrow. That's a Prado.
Okay.
Which actually it shouldn't be. And that might be early enough that it's not actually badged a Prado because they were called Banderos. The Prado name took a while to gel. They were the Brazilian
this
built
is the
ones.
Iron Pig.
There she is. Not a pretty
That's the 55.
Not a pretty thing, yeah.
Okay.
So anyway,
well, we learned a bunch about Land Cruisers.
yeah, cool cars.
Yeah, and all the people who have owned them would be like, duh. And
Meanwhile,
we're like, we discovered something.
Like, there's something new, and if I should buy a farm, so I should have a Land Cruiser to cruise on my land.
Yeah. Well, everyone else is like, damn it, we already know this and have known it for some time, which is why they got expensive. But in any case.
I love falling in love with cars that I didn't know.
Yes, it's the antidote to falling out of love with dumb modern cars that don't inspire you.
Yeah, I was just in a GLS yesterday. That's a friend's loaner. And I thought, how can something be so terrible?
And expensive.
And I don't know, it was a loaner car because his SL, he's got an SL that is at 100 days out of service in 8 months so far. It just keeps
Is this a
dying.
new SL?
New SL, yeah. Dies on him continually, dies on the mechanics. They can't fix. They've replaced everything and the car just turns itself off and like no lights, no nothing.
Nice.
Just kills all power.
Perfect.
And he's got GLS loaner and this time, I think it's the his ninth time his car was towed in.
So it's lemon law time.
Well, he's going to wait until he racks up his full refund because in the meantime, all those loaners are free. And
Yes, makes sense.
Anyway, that
Wow.
was very loud.
Well, on that note, we will sign off for now.
Toodles. See you next week-ish.
Or
Oh, we
similar.
were late last week. Whatever. Sometimes you're just late. No explanation. We're back to the BJ, HJ.
Oh,
Never-
I see.
Yeah, see.